So we celebrate today the feasts of St Peter and Paul. This always falls on the 29th of June, so it doesn't always land on a Sunday. But today it does, and it's considered important enough that it moves what normally happens on a Sunday, and we celebrate Peter and Paul's feast day. That's because they're so important. We might speak of them as being foundational to our faith, because we say that the church is built on an apostolic foundation, that it's built on the teaching of the apostles. Now that's not just these two, but of course these two have a particular and even preeminent role, like a really important role. And so we speak of the foundation that they lay as followers of Jesus. One of the things that strikes me, though, is that they are an unusual pair when we think about them as foundational to our church. They're, one of the things about the Bible generally is the heroes don't look that heroic often enough. Peter and Paul, they're in a time when usually if you were writing a story, the heroes were extraordinary. Peter and Paul's flaws are evident for everybody to see. And one way of putting it, just to put it a little bit simply, is that their story is a story about their fears, I think. It's a story about their fears. Peter's fears are kind of obvious. We see his courage at various points. He's happy to stand up for Jesus at various moments. He promises impetuously that he'll follow Jesus to death, and Jesus looks at him at one point and says, "That's just not going to happen. You're going to deny me 3 times rather than go to the cross with me." And sure enough, of course, that's exactly what happens. When push comes to shove, Peter, the clear leader of the first followers of Jesus, pretends that he doesn't even know Jesus. He denies him because he's scared of what will happen to him. Paul doesn't look quite so fearful. Paul doesn't seem to be so afraid. The first time we meet Paul, he's actually called Saul, and they're about to persecute and in fact stone to death one of the early followers of Jesus, a man called Stephen. And Saul is very supportive of this. He's a very zealous Jew. He thinks that these followers of Jesus are leading people down the wrong path. And so when they lay their cloaks, those who are going to kill Stephen, lay their cloaks at the feet of Saul, in a very chilling line in the Acts of the Apostles, we're told that Saul thoroughly approved of their murder, Stephen's murder. That doesn't sound like Paul's very scared. Doesn't sound like he's a fearful guy. But can I suggest to you that behind that action, we might even say behind that hatred at that moment, is actually fear. It seems to me that fear often lies behind acts of hate. That behind somebody doing something hateful to somebody else is actually that they're really scared. They're fearful of what the other person is doing or what the other person represents. And so fear drives them to violence. And that can be as dramatic as the story that I've just recounted, or it can be in little moments. But the truth is that fear is a huge driver in our lives. Paul and Peter aren't alone in that. And if that was the end of the story for these two, we might say, well, that's a fairly miserable start to the church. Look at these two. But of course, there's more to that story. There's more to that story. There's a beautiful moment in John's Gospel when Peter he meets the risen Jesus. So it's after Jesus has been crucified, he's risen from the dead, and he appears to the disciples, and he takes Peter at the end of a meal. They have breakfast by the Sea of Galilee, and Peter and Jesus simply talk. And Jesus says to Peter, "Simon," that was Peter's other name, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter says, sure, I love you. And then Jesus asks him again, do you love me? And Peter says, yeah, of course I love you. And he asks him a third time, do you love me? Peter's frustrated by this point and says, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. There's not a word of condemnation. It's not a word of judgment on Jesus' part. I suspect it's only afterwards that Peter looks back and thinks, the worst moment of my life, the moment when I denied Jesus 3 times, has just been undone. The moment of fear where out of great fear I denied Jesus, the best person, the greatest person I've ever known, my Lord. That worst moment has been undone here by Jesus simply saying to me, do you love me? It's a beautiful moment of Peter's fear, I think, being turned into faith once more. We see it again in the Acts of the Apostles in the first reading today too. Peter's been imprisoned for his faith in Jesus. He's clearly got some courage somewhere if he's been prepared to be imprisoned for his faith. But we're told that he was fearful until this mysterious event happens where the angel releases him and he's able to walk out of the prison. Paul's hatred and perhaps the fear that lies behind that changes when he walks along the road to Damascus on his way to persecute the first followers of Jesus. And he's struck there by an encounter with the risen Jesus. He's met by Christ. Jesus meets him there. And that encounter is so profound and so strong and powerful and disorienting that we're told that Paul was blinded for some time until he went to one of the followers of Jesus who heals him. And Paul goes on to be a great apostle, a great leader of the church, calling people to encounter the person of Jesus for themselves. So they're at the foundations of our church. They were fearful men who ended up with great faith. And we see that captured just so beautifully here in the gospel. Jesus is with his disciples and he says to them, who do people say I am? And they give lots of answers. They say, well, some say you're a prophet, some say you're a great teacher, some say you're this guy come back from the dead. Then Jesus looks at them and says, well, who do you say I am? Who do you say I am? And it's at that point that Peter, filled with great faith, says, well, you're the Messiah. You're the King that we've been waiting for. You're the Son of the living God. And Jesus says to Peter at that moment, well, it wasn't just your own thinking, it wasn't your own reasoning, it wasn't flesh and blood that gave that to you. It was actually revealed to you. That's the foundation of our faith, really. It's not these men per se, but it's the profession of faith that they make and the way that they then end up leading the church on the basis of that foundation. I do think their journey is similar to ours, or our journey is similar to theirs. So often we can experience great fear in our life. We can be afraid of many things. We can be afraid of what people think, like Peter, and that can lead us to deny what we know to be true. Sometimes we can be fearful, and that can lead us to actions of hurt, actions that damage others, like Paul. But like both these figures, these great witnesses of our faith, we're invited to hear Jesus speak to us and say to us, who do you say I am? To ask that question. There's lots of ideas in our world, in our culture today about who Jesus is. Lots of people give you all sorts of answers. But for us as Catholics, our faith is grounded upon Peter's response here. Who do you say I am? No one can answer the question for you. And so I want to say to the children who are making their first communion this morning, in a very special way today, you're being asked that question by Jesus. Jesus is looking at each and every one of you and saying, well, who do you say I am? Who do you say I am? And please God, revelation is given to you too, and you're able to say, I believe that you're Jesus, the Son of God, and that today you're giving yourself to me for the first time in Holy Communion. This is very beautiful, isn't it? We make this act of faith each week, and each week we receive the greatest gift we could receive, the gift of Jesus himself. It's true not just for the kids making their first communion, it's true for each and every one of us. Jesus stands before us and asks us, well, who do you say I am? He's not asking for what other people think, he's asking for what you think. And then as we make that response of faith, he's inviting us to receive the greatest gift he could give, which is himself. As we celebrate Eucharist then today, we're invited to make an act of faith afresh, a faith that's built on the faith of Peter and Paul and the other apostles, but a faith that we also have to make our own.